Welcome to Reading the Bible Together and to Genesis chapter 49 and to the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. Why am I bringing you there? Well, more precisely, I'm bringing you into the hospital synagogue so we can look at Marc Chagall's breathtaking stained glass windows, each one representing one of the tribes of Israel, and the words of blessing, and sometimes not so much a blessing as a warning, which Jacob bestows upon his sons. They will reflect similar blessings given to the tribes by Moses, as the tribes 500 years later were finally about to enter the promised land in Deuteronomy chapter 33. Now, the windows, while they are beautiful and colorful and filled with imagery, are also more than a little puzzling, and they're hard to figure out. On my visits there, not even the little guidebook was able to help me figure them out. In the same way, the blessings and the warnings that Jacob bestows upon his sons are difficult to figure out as well. To complicate matters, they are written in poetic Hebrew with lots of wordplay and puns and so on, and alliteration, which simply does not translate well into English. It's a mixture of looking forward and looking back, and the blessings are an attempt to characterize each son and each tribe that follows and where those tribes will settle and how that will impact their life. Well, so let's take a look, and we'll do the best we can, and I'll close today's study with some images of the Chagall windows for you. I encourage you to look it up on the web. Just look under Hadassah Hospital Chagall windows, and there'll be all kinds of stuff for you there. So, to the blessings, to the sons. Reuben. As firstborn, Reuben would have expected to receive the primary birthright, but that primary birthright, which includes the double blessing, had already been given to Joseph's sons. The rights as firstborn were denied to Reuben. And you may recall it's because he disgraced himself when in a power struggle he defiled his father's bed with his adultery with Bilhah, one of his father's secondary wives. Reuben did not qualify for a position of leadership in the family, his father said, because he was turbulent as the waters, not good leadership material. So Simeon and Levi are next, and Jacob described these sons as cruel and violent, both with human and with animal life. And he was referring to their massacre of the men of Shechem in retaliation for the prince of Shechem sexually assaulting their sister Dinah. And the descendants of both Simeon and Levi were actually in the end scattered. They didn't end up receiving an area when the land was portioned out to the tribes. The descendants of Simeon kind of disintegrated as a tribe. By the time Moses gives his blessings some 500 years later, he doesn't even mention the tribe of Simeon. And ultimately, they settled around the territory given to Judah rather than in their own land. In contrast, as we mentioned the last time, the descendants of Levi would be given the honor of serving as a priestly tribe. Rather than being given a distinct area of land of their own, they were living in 48 places scattered throughout the country. So everybody would have access to one of these priestly families. Now, one such area in which they settled was Ein Kerem, the birthplace of John the Baptist and the home, of course, of John the Baptist's parents, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and where Mary went to tell Elizabeth the news that she too was great with child. It's also, Ein Kerem is also coincidentally where the Hadassah Hospital and Chagall windows are located. See how this all comes around together. On to Judah. Finally, Jacob has some good words. In this case, they're good words for Judah's future. He doesn't refer to Judah's wrongdoing in taking part in selling Joseph and then deceiving his father about Joseph's fate. Gee, Dad, all we found was this bloody robe. Is it familiar to you? Nor does it talk about that chapter that we uncomfortably read about Judah's treatment, his shocking treatment of his daughter-in-law Tamar. Instead, perhaps due to Judah offering himself in Benjamin's place with the whole cup in the bag stunt that Joseph pulled, Jacob spoke of Judah's tribe having the respect and the praise of his brothers. He certainly is the one who seems to have learned the most from all the experience. Kings would be among his descendants. Jacob says, the scepter will not depart from Judah until he comes until he comes to whom it belongs in the obedience of the nations. Now Jacob was foretelling that a ruler would come from Judah's line and be the Messiah. It came to pass that not only King David, but ultimately Jesus came from the tribe of Judah. Jacob then departs from addressing his sons in birth order and instead jumps down to Zebulun, who was the 10th son, actually ends up as the 6th and last son by Leah. Now Jacob foretells that Zebulun's tribe would be involved with ships, even though the area of land given to Zebulun was not adjacent to the Mediterranean Sea. However, they would do business with their neighbors, the sea-going Phoenicians, whose country did border the sea and who became important trading partners with Israel. And the way in which Hebrew letters are formed is traced to the earlier Phoenician alphabet. Even the word alphabet comes from the first 2 letters of that language and of Hebrew, Aleph and Bet. So, Issachar. Speaking of the future, Jacob said that Issachar's descendants would be like burdened mules. They would have to bend their shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Again and again, animals are used to symbolize these tribes. And in fact, the tribe of Issachar was located in the plain of Esdraelon, and it was always subject to armies that invaded the land from time to time, subjecting the population to forced labor. The tribe of Dan. Now, Jacob called on Dan to provide justice for his people, even though he was destined, Jacob says, to become as a serpent by the roadside, a viper along the path. Why is it described that way? Because it was the first tribe to become seriously involved with the practice of idolatry, which would plague the nation for the centuries to come. Shaken by this insight that was in store for Dan, Jacob interrupts speaking to his sons to raise his prayer to the Lord. "O Lord, deliver your people." Next is the tribe of Gad, and Jacob describes Gad as being attacked and then attacking in a turn. And it certainly sounds as though a lot of that is happening in the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. The tribe of Gad, in fact, was assigned the area next to the people of Ammon, the Ammonites, who frequently made border raids into that area. Things were rarely peaceful there. Sounds a little bit like the Middle East of today. Asher, the tribe of Asher, would live in the northwest part of the land, which is the fertile area which provided the most abundant crops. And to this day, Galilee is sort of the breadbasket of Israel. His food will be rich, delicacies fit for a king. And in fact, I once visited a restaurant in the north of Israel called Asher, and its motto, delicacies fit for a king. You know you're in good tradition when you go back 3,500 years to find the motto for your restaurant. I can tell you that the bagel with cream cheese and smoked salmon I had at Asher's was delicious. Naphtali. Settling to the east of Asher, the tribe of Naphtali was characterized as free mountain dwellers. Many people are surprised by how mountainous Israel is, and even more surprised to learn it's a volcanic zone in the north. One of the great thrills while traveling along these mountains is to spot an ibex, one of those beautiful mountain goats with the curled horn perched on the steep hillsides. Naphtali is described as a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. It makes me think even more of the delicate gazelle, which you often spot in the desert mountains of the center and the south of the country. Perhaps that's the image Jacob had in mind. And now Joseph. Jacob spoke in greater detail of Joseph than any of the other sons because the most significant blessing was bestowed upon him and really through him to his 2 boys. Jacob spoke of Joseph's fruitfulness in spite of being attacked with bitterness and hostility by his brothers and by Potiphar's wife. Joseph was promised victory because even though cursed by others, he was blessed by God himself, and it would be God who would make him prosper. And Jacob described Joseph, which would be no surprise to the other brothers, as the prince among his brothers. In fact, it came to pass that the history of Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were stories about victorious leaders. From the tribe of Ephraim came Joshua and Deborah and Samuel. And from the tribe of Manasseh came Gideon and Jephthah. Very, very famous leaders throughout the Old Testament. Finally, Benjamin, son of Jacob's beloved Rachel, was given the name which means son of the right hand or son of honor or good fortune. That's what Benjamin means. But when it came right down to it, Jacob was very brief in speaking of his destiny and describes Benjamin's tribe really only as violent. And subsequent history does record acts of violence from this tribe. And violent people, most notably King Saul, who was ruthless in his attempts to assassinate David. So, such are the blessings and such are the warnings, maybe even a curse or two. And they conclude with the line, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him. And having done so, Jacob, impossibly old, almost completely blind, has finally reached the end of his remarkable life, which began by clutching the heel of his brother and ends surrounded by his many sons. He gives instructions that he should be buried in the ancestral burial cave which Abraham had purchased for Sarah back in Canaan, and to be buried there together with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and the faithful Leah. Why not with Rachel? Well, Rachel, you may remember, was buried near Bethlehem, where her tomb still resides, rather than Hebron with the others. Well, the poetic conclusion to his life, the life of Jacob, is captured in a single verse. It says, when Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. So ends the story of Jacob. But as for the story of his sons, boy, that's far from over. We'll hear next time how Genesis wraps things up in chapter 50, and then we'll have a couple of sessions to look back over from where we've come since beginning Genesis way back in January, on January 15th. So we'll see you next time. But first, I'm going to add a couple of Chagall windows for you to enjoy.